What happens when a 72-year-old ghost from boxing's past walks into a gym full of cocky champions and dares their star fighter to step into the ring? They laughed. They filmed. They called him Grandpa and waited for the embarrassment. But what unfolded next didn't just silence a gym. It shook the foundation of a sport. This isn't just a comeback story. It's a reckoning. Stay with us, because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why some ghosts come back not to haunt, but to teach, to fight, and to finish what the world tried to forget. If you have ever been misjudged like this character, click subscribe to not miss the next stories of justice. The midday sun slanted through the cracked windows of Steelheart Boxing Club, casting hazy golden streaks across the scuffed vinyl mats. It was just another loud, testosterone-filled afternoon in Southside Chicago's most hyped fight gym. Trainers shouting commands, gloves pounding against heavy bags, bodies dripping sweat, and the deep bass of hip-hop shaking the walls. No one noticed the figure standing outside the gym door. At first, he looked like a ghost from a different era, wearing a faded gray hoodie, weathered jeans, and sneakers whose soles had outlived most of the fighters inside. Walter "Walt" King, 72 years old, and walking like time owed him something, paused for a moment, gripping the handle of a duffel bag that had seen more fights than anyone inside could imagine. He pushed open the door. The noise hit him like a wave. Sweat, swagger, and ego. Young men, some barely 20, moved with the cocky energy of those who hadn't yet learned respect. Female fighters kept to their own corners, rarely acknowledged. And hanging in the center of it all, like a neon-lit monument to modern boxing, was a digital screen cycling through TikToks and Instagram reels of the gym's prized fighter. Tyrell T-Flex Dawson, 23 years old. Shredded, loud, fast hands and faster mouth. A local celebrity with brand deals, a viral personality, and $1 million smile, he flashed more often than a jab. No one noticed Walt shuffle past the front desk. That is, until he stopped in front of it. Behind the counter, Jason Ruiz, mid-40s, stocky with a gold glove pendant swinging from his neck, barely glanced up from his phone. He used to be a middleweight. Now, he just ran the gym and reminded people of it. "You lost, old man?" Jason asked, not bothering to hide his annoyance. Walt's voice was calm, measured. "Just here to watch." Jason gave him a long once-over and grunted. $10 for spectators. He held out a hand like he was waiting for a parking ticket. Walt dug into his pocket, pulled out a crumpled $10 bill, and placed it in Jason's palm without a word. He moved quietly into the gym, choosing a worn wooden bench in the far corner. Set his bag down. Saturday. And watched. And watched. He didn't blink at the speed drills or the flashy pad routines. His eyes scanned like a scanner programmed decades ago. He noticed loose bolts on the speed bags, sloppy rap jobs, trainers who yelled more than they taught, fighters who moved fast but forgot their feet. But no one noticed him, until Tyrell did. Between rounds, as Tyrell took a selfie mid-sweat, he paused when he saw Walt sitting quietly across the gym. The old man had been there for hours, unmoving. "Yo," Tyrell laughed, nudging his sparring partner. "Peep the comeback tour. We got Rocky's granddad in the building." Laughter erupted from nearby fighters. Some even turned their cameras to film. Walt didn't flinch. His eyes were locked across the gym, not on Tyrell, but on a lone female boxer in the far corner. Imani Carter, 24. Focused. Frustrated. She was talented. Anyone could see that. But something was missing. Every punch she threw was technically sound, but lacked soul. Her rhythm stuttered. She repeated the same combination over and over, chasing perfection she couldn't quite reach. As the hours passed, fighters cycled in and out. But Walt stayed, watching, taking quiet mental notes. When the crowd thinned out by early evening, and the gym started winding down, Imani was still there, hitting the speed bag, but her timing was off now. Fatigue had started to erode her form. Walt stood, stretched his back, and shuffled over to the water fountain near her corner. On his way back, he paused. "May I?" he asked softly, motioning toward the speed bag. Imani turned, startled. She blinked. Sure." Walt nodded toward her feet. "Your stance. Widen your base. And drop that right shoulder. Just a half inch." She stared at him. This man didn't look like a coach. Not in that hoodie. Not with that ancient gym bag. But something in his voice, measured, unshakable, told her to try. She adjusted her feet, dropped her shoulder, hit the bag again. Pop, pop, pop. The rhythm was instantly better. The rebounds came smoother. The timing cleaner. Imani blinked. That's better. Just physics, Walt said, with the faintest smile. Same since they invented the wheel. Before Imani could respond, a sharp voice cut through the gym. Hey, old-timer. Jason Ruiz strode over, scowl in full force. You don't work here. Don't mess with my clients or my equipment. Walt had adjusted the height of the speed bag slightly, noticing it was improperly set. My apologies, Walt said with a respectful nod. Didn't mean any harm. Jason narrowed his eyes. You want to train, you pay for training. You want to watch, stay on the bench. Clear. Crystal, Walt replied evenly. As Jason stormed off, Imani shot Walt a look of quiet thanks and returned to her bag. This time, maintaining the stance he'd shown her. As the gym emptied, Walt offered to help clean up. Jason, counting receipts, barely looked up. Suit yourself. So Walt cleaned, but not lazily, with reverence. He wiped down speed bags like polishing relics, adjusted machines with careful hands. He treated the space not like a gym, but a sacred place. When the main floor cleared, Walt moved to the furthest corner and began to shadowbox. And that's when it happened. The shuffle of an old man was gone. In its place, grace, economy, precision. His fists cut through air like silk. No wasted motion. No flashy moves. Just pure rhythm. Like he was dancing with a ghost. A little boy, waiting for his dad, stopped dead in his tracks, mouth hanging open. The child watched, enchanted, until his father called him away. Walt finished the routine, breathing calm and steady, then grabbed his bag and moved toward the exit. He paused by Jason's office. You ever let old school step in for a round or two? He asked casually. Jason looked up, half amused. Yo, Tyrell, he yelled. Old man here wants to know if he can get in the ring. Tyrell zipped his gym bag and turned, smirking. You serious? He said, trying not to laugh. Like for real. Phones came out. People started recording. Walt just smiled faintly, nodded goodnight, and walked out into the Chicago night. Behind him, the laughter echoed, but not from everyone. One pair of eyes, Imani's, followed him out, thoughtful. She'd seen something no one else had. She didn't know what yet, but she had a feeling this was no ordinary man. The next morning, the same dusty sunlight cut through Steelheart Boxing Club. And just like the day before, Walter King, the mysterious old man in the faded hoodie, was there. Same bench, same calm expression, same $10 bill, handed to Jason without a word. It became routine. Every afternoon that week, Walt showed up. Quiet, watchful, always on that bench in the back. Occasionally, he helped mop up or reorganize equipment. Sometimes he'd tighten bolts on bags or rewrap a fraying glove. No one asked him to. No one thanked him either. But he kept coming. And Imani noticed. Her rhythm had shifted since that first interaction. She didn't quite understand how or why, but after adjusting her stance as Walt had suggested, everything felt sharper. She began watching him closely between her own drills. The way he shadowboxed when the gym was nearly empty. The way his feet moved like they'd never forgotten the ring. The way he said nothing but saw everything. On Thursday, after a sparring session left her with a sore jaw and a bruised ego, Imani approached him. She stood in front of him for a second, awkward, then finally said it. That thing you showed me last week, it worked. Walt looked up and nodded. Good. Fundamentals always do. She hesitated, then added, could you take a look at my hook? Coach Brooks says I telegraph it. Walt glanced around to make sure Jason wasn't nearby, then stood. Show me, he said. Imani threw a left hook at half speed. Walt observed silently, then gently repositioned her elbow, her back foot, and her weight shift. Don't load up so much, he said. Power isn't in the muscle, it's in the sequence. Let gravity do its job. She threw the hook again. Cleaner, quicker, more natural. Where'd you learn all this? She asked, breathing heavy. Been around, Walt replied. Then, after a moment, boxing's been the same for centuries. The basics don't change. People just forget them. From that day on, something shifted. They never made it official. No contract. No handshake deal. But Imani started asking questions. And Walt always had answers. Brief, clear, and immediately useful. He never hovered. Never demanded attention. Just observed. Then quietly offered a suggestion if she seemed open. Over the next few days, They formed an unspoken rhythm. She'd train. He'd watch. Then she'd approach, and they'd talk. One afternoon, as she iced her knuckles, Walt said something that lodged in her mind like a grain of fire. Don't fight for them to notice. Fight so they can't ignore. The words echoed through her next sparring session. That week, Imani went 3 rounds with Tasha Rivera, a ranked fighter from another gym. Normally, she'd tire midway and go defensive. But this time, she stayed light on her feet. Slipped punches instead of blocking them. Timed her counters. Landed clean. Coach Darnell Brooks, a quiet, serious man in his late 40s who'd been Jason's longtime friend and head trainer at Steelheart, watched from the edge of the ring with growing interest. He noticed something new in her style. Something old. After the bell rang to end the final round, he walked over and clapped Imani lightly on the shoulder. Loud enough for the gym to hear. Good work today, Brooks said. Something's changed. Keep it up. Walt, sitting on the bench in the corner as always, said nothing. But his eyes met Darnell's for the briefest moment. The coach nodded to himself. He knew that kind of timing, that kind of head movement. He'd seen it before, but not in years. Tyrell Dawson, meanwhile, wasn't enjoying the shift in energy. He'd built his reputation on flash, speed, and charisma. The gym revolved around him. His training clips, his merch, his social media lives. And now, people were watching the old man. Tyrell couldn't stand it. So, he weaponized the one thing he knew best, mockery. He pulled out his phone. "Welcome back to Boxing with Grandpa," he said into the camera, mimicking a hunched shuffle and clutching his back in mock pain. "We're going to learn how to hit the bag without breaking a hip today." Laughter flooded the comments. The video racked up 40,000 views by evening. Jason even shared it on the gym's official page, captioned, "Steelheart Legends, LOL." Walt didn't react. Not when it played in the locker room. Not when Tyrell exaggerated his limp while walking by. But Imani watched it. And she was furious. Later that week, while grabbing her gear, Imani ran into Tyrell near the exit. "So you went the distance with Tasha?" Tyrell asked, feigning casualness. "Yup. Where'd that come from?" She shrugged. "Hard work." He leaned in slightly, smirking. "Or maybe tips from the fossil in the corner?" She narrowed her eyes. "What's it to you?" "Nothing," he said. "Just saying. Might want to learn from winners, not some rando who probably got his knowledge from watching Rocky reruns." Imani's jaw tightened. "You don't know anything about him." "And you do?" Tyrell laughed. "What's next? He's secretly Muhammad Ali's trainer. At least he doesn't spend half his training time taking selfies," she snapped. Tyrell stepped closer. "Watch yourself, Imani. Jason's got big plans for this gym, and they don't include charity cases or geriatric mascots." Before Imani could react, Walt's voice came from behind them. Calm, clear, unbothered. "Not worth it." He looked straight at Imani. "Save it for the ring." Tyrell scoffed, but backed off. That evening, Coach Brooks approached Walt for the first time. "You boxed before?" he asked. Walt nodded once. "Some. A long time ago." "You've been working with Imani." Walt said nothing at first. Then quietly, "She's got raw talent. Just needs focus. She listens." Brooks studied him. "You want to train her officially? We can talk." Before Walt could answer, Jason's voice barked from across the gym. "Brooks, I need you in the office." Brooks gave Walt one last look. "Think about it," and walked away. The next day, Walt came in early, helping the maintenance guy fix a jammed locker when he noticed something strange. Tyrell sneaking over to Imani's gear. The young fighter dipped her hand wraps in water, tucked them behind a weight rack, clearly trying to sabotage her next session. As Tyrell turned to leave, Walt stepped into his path. Tyrell raised his brows. "Problem?" "Yeah," Walt said evenly. "Those aren't yours." Tyrell smirked. "What are you going to do? Shake your cane at me?" A few gym members turned toward the confrontation. And that's when Walt, still quiet, said, "You got a lot of energy. How about putting it in the ring?" The gym went still. Tyrell blinked. "You challenging me?" Walt nodded once. 3 rounds. No headgear. Just gloves and mouth guards. Jason burst from his office, drawn by the silence. "What's going on?" "Old man wants to spar," Tyrell said, grinning wide. Jason laughed out loud. "You're serious?" "Friday," Walt said. 3 rounds. Jason clapped Tyrell's shoulder. "Hell yes. We'll live stream it. Might go viral when T-Flex knocks out Social Security." Phones came out instantly. The gym buzzed. Imani shoved through the crowd and whispered to Walt, "Are you crazy?" He's half your age. Age is a number, Walt said. But pride is something else. The buzz didn't die down. By the next morning, Steelheart Boxing Club felt less like a gym and more like a movie set gearing up for its climax. The sparring match between 72-year-old Walt King and the gym's superstar Tyrell T-Flex Dawson had been scheduled for Friday night. 3 rounds. No headgear. Live-streamed across every platform Tyrell's fans could access. Jason Ruiz, the gym's owner, was already making calls to local influencers. "This is gold, man," he said, pacing around the office, practically foaming with excitement. "We frame it as old school versus new era. We sell merch, boost our gym's profile, maybe even get a sponsor." But back on the floor, where sweat met canvas, not everyone was laughing. Imani Carter watched Walt closely as he returned to his usual spot on the bench that morning. He looked calm, but not complacent. Focused. There was no sense of showmanship in his posture, just quiet intent. She dropped into the seat beside him, lowered her voice. "You really gonna go through with it?" Walt didn't look at her. He was busy wrapping his hands with slow, deliberate care. The wrap glided around each knuckle with the precision of a surgeon. "Sometimes silence gets too loud," he said. Imani blinked. "What's that mean?" Walt tied the final loop and tugged the wrap tight. "Means sometimes the only way to be heard again is to make noise they can't ignore." Word spread fast, too fast. By Wednesday, the gym had transformed. A local camera crew arrived to help set up lighting. Folding chairs were stacked against the wall for Friday's live audience. Even the Chicago Tribune called asking for comment. Jason basked in the attention. "We've got something special here," he said during an on-camera interview. "A generational showdown. Our guy Tyrell's the future. But hey, everyone loves a comeback story, right?" But in his heart, Jason wasn't rooting for a comeback. He was rooting for content. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Coach Darnell Brooks was sitting in his office, thumbing through an old box of clippings he'd nearly thrown out months ago. He paused on a yellowed cover from 1985. The mind behind the legend, Walt King and the rise of Ray Blitz Barnes. There he was, a younger Walt, standing behind the undefeated champion of that era. Same sharp eyes, same stoic focus. Coach Brooks leaned back in his chair, the magazine trembling slightly in his hands. If this was the Walt King, then they weren't setting up a viral joke. They were setting up a reckoning. Friday came fast, and with it came the spectacle. Lights, music, phones, streams. Steelheart Boxing Club was packed with spectators, some gym members, others just there for the drama. The live stream had over 12,000 viewers tuned in before the first bell. Tyrell was doing final stretches in the corner, already mic'd up and waving to the cameras. He wore a custom-made t-shirt showing a cartoon version of Walt getting uppercut into the clouds. Caption: "Bye-bye, Grandpa." His fans ate it up. But across the gym, Walt wasn't looking at any of it. He sat quietly on a bench in the locker room, eyes closed, listening to his breath. Slow, deep, grounded. Imani entered, holding her gear bag tight to her chest. She saw the calm on his face and felt her own nerves settle. "They're saying you're going to embarrass yourself," she said. Walt opened his eyes. "The only person who can embarrass me is me. And I made peace with my limitations a long time ago." She paused, then stepped forward and hugged him. "Show them," she whispered. "Show them all." When Walt stepped into the ring, something shifted. The laughter that had filled the room before dulled into a hum. People still smiled, but it was the kind of unsure, twitchy smile you wear when you realize you might have underestimated the wrong person. He wasn't wearing flashy gear, just black trunks, old leather gloves, a sleeveless gray shirt that had seen 100 gyms in 50 different cities. Tyrell entered seconds later, music blaring, crowd cheering. He bounced into the ring like a showman, confident, loose, but something in his eyes was different now. He wasn't laughing anymore. Not fully. The referee brought them to the center. 3 rounds. Clean fight. Touch gloves. Tyrell extended his hand, almost mockingly. Walt touched gloves, no emotion on his face. He didn't need words. The bell rang. Round 1. Tyrell opened fast, his signature move. Jabs to the head. Quick footwork. A few body shots thrown to test distance. But Walt didn't engage. He moved. Not like an old man, like a surgeon. Each shift of his feet created angles. Each head slip dodged punches by inches. He didn't strike first. He just let Tyrell punch air. To most in the room, it looked like evasion. But to a trained eye, it was data gathering. He's not fighting, someone complained. Coach Brooks, standing near the ring, shook his head. He's downloading. Tyrell got frustrated. By the end of round 1, his breathing had quickened. His hands were lower. He returned to his corner scowling. He ain't doing nothing, he told Jason. Then hit him. Jason barked. Make him do something. Round 2. Tyrell came out more aggressive. Tried to cut off Walt's movement. Drove him toward the ropes. And for a moment, it looked like the end was near. Until Walt pivoted under a hook and disappeared from Tyrell's angle. Just vanished. Tyrell stumbled. Threw a wild combo. Missed. Come on, Grandpa, Tyrell shouted. Show me that ancient kung fu. And then it happened. Walt stepped forward. No wind-up. No show. Just one short uppercut. 6 inches of movement. But it landed flush to Tyrell's solar plexus. Tyrell froze. His eyes went wide. He exhaled all at once, like his lungs had been vacuumed. Then dropped, one knee to the canvas, gasping. The crowd gasped louder. Phones dropped. Someone whispered, "Did he just knock him down with one punch?" The referee began the count. Tyrell stood at 8. But the damage was done, not to his body, but to his confidence. Walt. He just stepped back to the corner. No smile. No gloating. Just breathing. Round 3. Tyrell approached cautiously this time. The cocky footwork was gone. He respected the ghost now. They exchanged light punches. Technical, clean. But it was clear, Tyrell was surviving. Not dominating. When the final bell rang, the room didn't erupt in laughter or celebration. It stood in silence. Until someone, no one remembers who, began to clap. And then others joined. Not for Tyrell. For Walt King. Walt didn't wait for a decision. He took off his gloves, handed them to Imani, and stepped out of the ring. No speech. No fist raised. Just one quiet moment. A craftsman putting his tools away. Back in the locker room, Jason watched from the doorway, shell-shocked. Coach Brooks walked past him, holding an old VHS tape he'd pulled from storage. On the cover, scrawled in faded ink, "Ray Barnes, final session." "Coach, Walt King." "It's him," Brooks whispered. And the world had just remembered. The clip hit 80,000 views in under 8 hours. Walt King, 72, slipping under Tyrell Dawson's hook and delivering a punch that dropped the city's flashiest young fighter, was now all over sports feeds. But it wasn't the knockdown that stirred the internet. It was the elegance of it. The way Walt moved like water. The way his face never changed. The way he walked out afterward like nothing had happened. Like he'd simply done what needed to be done and left. It wasn't rage. It wasn't revenge. It was discipline. And people noticed. That Saturday morning, Imani arrived at Steelheart early, already gloved and jumping rope. Her footwork was sharper. Her stance lower. Something in her had clicked. And across the gym, she wasn't the only one moving different. Tyrell Dawson, now a walking meme on social media, was back to training, but without the usual circus. No camera. No followers. No flashy gear. Just focus. He jabbed the heavy bag like it owed him respect, each movement tighter, more intentional. Coach Brooks watched from a distance and nodded. Meanwhile, Jason Ruiz wasn't nodding. He was pacing his office on the phone with a promoter. Yeah, it's real. His name's Walt King. No, I didn't know who he was. I thought he was homeless or something. Listen, the old man dropped Tyrell like a sack of bricks. We can spin this. Viral comeback story. A legend reborn. Give me 24 hours, and I'll have his name on a banner. He hung up and smiled. Not because he understood what had happened, but because he saw dollar signs. That same morning, in a cramped downtown apartment with stacks of boxing history books covering the kitchen table, sports journalist Talia Jensen was watching the clip frame by frame. She wasn't laughing. She wasn't clapping. She was remembering. Something about the footwork, the measured tempo, the way Walt never wasted an ounce of movement. She pulled an old magazine from her file crate. Yellowed pages. Headline across the top. The mind behind the champions. Walt King's silent strategy. She looked at the photo. Walt standing in the corner of the ring behind Ray Blitz Barnes, the undefeated phenom of the late 80s. Talia's eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. It was him. By Monday, Steelheart Gym had changed completely. The bench Walt used to sit on alone was now surrounded by curious glances. Fighters, some skeptical, some respectful, were suddenly looking his way. Imani found herself fielding questions too. What's he like? Did he really train Ray Barnes? Is he taking on students? But Walt? He hadn't changed at all. He still arrived with a $10 bill. Still sat quietly. Still spoke when needed. And when he spoke, people listened. That afternoon, Coach Brooks approached. Magazine in hand. He slid it onto the bench next to Walt. Walt didn't look at it at first. Then he did. His fingers traced the edges of the cover. His face didn't change, but his shoulders shifted slightly. Like the memory was heavier than it looked. You trained Ray Barnes, Brooks said, no longer a question. I did, Walt replied. You were one of the best strategists in the country. I was a man who knew how to pay attention. Then why disappear? Walt stared ahead. That life ended when my son did. Brooks said nothing. Some silences deserved to stay intact. That evening, Talia showed up at the gym. Notebook in one hand. Press badge around her neck. Confidence in every step. Jason switched from greedy manager to gracious host in seconds. Welcome to Steelheart. You here for Tyrell's comeback? The old guy? I mean, we're doing this special docuseries now. It's crazy. Talia cut him off. I'm here for Walt King. Jason blinked. Excuse me. The trainer behind Ray Barnes. 7 world champions. The man who walked away without a word. Jason's smile faltered. You sure it's the same guy? Talia showed him the article. The footage. The photo. Jason swallowed. Oh damn. Imani, listening nearby, slipped away. She found Walt quietly rewrapping hand pads in the back. Did you know? She asked. Walt raised an eyebrow. That you were a legend? She said. I was a coach, he said. The rest is just noise. But why come back now? Walt took a long breath. His voice lowered. Because sometimes the sport forgets what it used to be. And sometimes it needs to be reminded. The next morning, Jason changed everything. He had the front desk print a banner. Featuring legendary trainer Walt King, now at Steelheart. He didn't ask permission. He didn't care. He saw a wave forming and wanted to ride it before it passed. Walt didn't acknowledge it. But others did. Gym members began watching his shadowboxing like a masterclass. Even some of Tyrell's entourage started hovering nearby, looking less like hype men and more like students. Imani was no longer just a lone female fighter. She was now the one Walt coached. Her sparring sharpened. Her footwork changed. People noticed, including Tyrell. Later that week, during closing hours, Tyrell approached Walt quietly while the gym emptied out. No cameras. No entourage. Just him. You really train Ray Barnes? He asked. Walt nodded. Tyrell rubbed the back of his neck. You didn't have to fight me. You could have just told me. Respect isn't given in the ring, Walt said. It's earned in it. Tyrell hesitated. All that trash talk online, just promotion. Wasn't personal. Walt met his eyes. Respect's not given after either. It's earned when you stop performing. Tyrell said nothing more. Just nodded. And walked away slower than he'd come in. The clip of the fight hit 200,000 views by the end of the week. The boxing world began to whisper. Is Walt King really back? What happened to him after Barnes died? Could he train again? But in a cemetery on the edge of Southside Chicago, Walt stood alone beneath a weathered headstone. It read, Jamal King, beloved son, 1975 to 1999. He placed a pair of miniature gloves at the base. And the same photo Imani had once seen, of him between Ray Barnes and Jamal. He whispered, tomorrow's not about winning. It's about remembering who we were and what we lost. That evening, as he returned to the gym, Walt walked into a transformed space. Lighting rigs, camera crew, Jason giving interviews again. I always believed in giving legends their due, Jason said to a local news outlet. When I realized who he was, I knew the world needed to see Walt King in action again. Walt walked past him without a word. In the locker room, he found Imani waiting. They're turning this into a circus, she said, disgusted. Circuses still need performers, Walt replied with a slight smile. How's your hook coming? She blinked, caught off guard, then smiled. Clean. Landed it hard on the bag yesterday. Good. Remember what I told you. Fight for yourself. Not for them. She nodded, but there was a finality in his voice that unsettled her. Walt, she began. Before she could continue, Tyrell entered, surprisingly alone. Can I talk to you? He asked Walt. Alone? Imani hesitated, but Walt nodded. She left, reluctantly. When the door shut behind her, Tyrell exhaled. I watched the footage again. Of Ray. That was really you coaching him. Walt nodded. Then why this? Tyrell asked. Why now? You could be rich, teaching celebrities, running camps. Walt looked him dead in the eyes. Because money doesn't fix the kind of pain I carry. Tyrell paused. About tomorrow, all that online hype. It's just show. I didn't mean disrespect. Then earn your respect in the ring, Walt said quietly. Not before. Not after. Tyrell nodded, then slowly walked away. Walt remained in the room. Alone. But for the first time in decades, not invisible. By Monday morning, Steelheart Boxing Club looked less like a gym and more like a reality show set. Light rigs were hung from the rafters. Tripods blocked walkways. The ring had been polished and branded, and a large vinyl banner now hung across the front wall. Legend returns. Walt King. Exclusive at SDLHERT. Walt never posed for the photo they used. He never agreed to the title. But there it was, his name turned into merchandise. His face, a symbol for a system that once discarded him. While Jason Ruiz gave interviews and talked sponsors, Walt stood near the back, mop in hand, quietly cleaning sweat off the floor no one else would touch. If he heard the noise around him, he didn't show it. He was too focused on what he had always done, prepare a space for discipline, not drama. But the world had shifted. The uppercut he landed on Tyrell Dawson wasn't just a punch. It was a spark. And now the entire city was watching him burn quietly back to life. Fighters began drifting toward his corner. First with questions, then with open hands. Coach, can you watch my right cross? Does my footwork look off to you? Walt didn't bark orders. He didn't wave arms or perform for cameras. He simply nodded, repositioned a foot, corrected a wrist, adjusted the angle of a shoulder, and stepped back. No applause, just progress. And behind him, like a shadow sharpening by the day, was Imani Carter, his quiet student turned reflection. She moved differently now. She breathed differently now. Sparring sessions that used to leave her flustered now ended with her opponents chasing shadows. Her hands had slowed down, but her eyes had sped up. One evening, as she finished her final set on the heavy bag, Coach Brooks approached her, a towel draped over his shoulder, his voice low. Your timing's not natural anymore. It's trained. That's good. Imani turned, surprised. Brooks was one of the few who didn't talk much unless something mattered. You're saying I've improved? I'm saying I've seen this style before, he said. It's old school. Controlled. Like something Walt King would teach. She smiled faintly. He has. Brooks didn't respond immediately. Then he looked around the gym, the blinking live stream lights, the branded merch table, the fake grins. You know, this place used to be about the fight. Maybe it still could be, Imani said. Brooks gave her a knowing look. Only if we rebuild it ourselves. 2 nights later, Brooks took Walt on a short drive 3 blocks from Steelheart. They parked outside an old warehouse, the kind people pass 1,000 times without seeing. The windows were cracked. The doors rusted. The floor probably hadn't been swept in years. But Walt stepped inside and didn't see ruin. He saw possibility. The bones are solid, Brooks said, tapping one of the beams. High ceilings. Good airflow. It's not much, but it's enough, Walt said. He walked to the center of the space, stood there silently for a long time. His hand reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled out a worn photograph, the one of him standing between 2 fighters. On the left was Ray Blitz Barnes. On the right, a young man with his same jawline. His son, Damien. We'll call it Damien's Corner, he said softly. Brooks didn't question it. Neither did Imani, who stood in the doorway, listening. Word traveled fast. Some fighters at Steelheart kept their heads down, unwilling to rock the boat. But others, those tired of the glitz, the cameras, the staged workouts, began sneaking off during off hours to train in the warehouse. There was no ring yet. No lockers. No music. Just bags bolted to wooden beams, duct-taped mats, and the presence of a man who knew exactly what mattered. And then, something no one expected happened. Tyrell Dawson showed up. No camera crew. No entourage. Just him. He watched quietly from the doorway as Imani worked through her drills, her stance a perfect replica of Walt's teachings. After 5 minutes, he stepped forward and said, "Can I work with you?" Walt didn't answer, just tossed him a pair of old gloves and pointed to the heavy bag. That was enough. Tyrell didn't say much after that. He trained with Imani every day, no showboating, no taunts. He worked like someone trying to earn his way back into a story he had laughed at just weeks earlier. You two remind me of someone, Walt murmured one afternoon as they sparred. Who? Imani asked. But Walt had already turned away, the ghosts of Ray and Damien flickering behind his eyes like distant stars. While the rebirth of Damien's corner bloomed quietly, Talia Jensen was unearthing something darker. Her investigation into Lucas Dane, the promoter tied to Ray Barnes' final match, had uncovered financial records linking him to a series of shell companies. One of them had provided startup funds to Steelheart Boxing LLC. On paper, Jason Ruiz was the face. But the money? Dane's. She brought the information to Coach Brooks, who immediately understood the implications. Ray didn't die in the ring because of bad luck, Brooks said slowly. He died because he said no to someone too powerful. And now that man is bankrolling the gym. Walt just shook up, Talia added. Brooks nodded grimly. This isn't about one punch anymore. Jason noticed the shift too. Class attendance dropped. Viewership on Tyrell's live streams tanked. Even his promotional deals were fading. And worst of all, Walt King's name had outgrown his gym. So Jason did what all men like him eventually do when power starts to slip. He offered a deal. Late one evening, Walt stood alone in Damien's corner, wrapping his hands slowly. The room filled only with the soft sound of fabric against skin. Jason walked in like he owned the place. You've made your point, he said, trying to sound casual. People respect you again. Hell, they worship you. Let's be honest, you don't belong in a dump like this. Walt didn't even look up. Jason stepped closer. Let's partner. You and me. We build something together. Walt King Academy. You train, I manage. Real money. Legacy cemented. Walt finally looked at him. Why now? Because the timing's right, Jason said, grinning. Because the world's looking. Walt set his hand wraps down slowly. Walked over. This gym, he said, gesturing to the cracked walls and raw wood, isn't about legacy. It's about truth. You want to use my name to clean your image. I want to use my image to give people a way out. Jason's face hardened. You don't understand what you're walking away from. I understand exactly who I'm walking away from, Walt said. Jason turned, eyes cold. This city forgets quick. The next viral kid will come along, and you'll be nobody again. Walt nodded. Then I'll be nobody, with peace. A week later, Coach Brooks handed in his resignation at Steelheart. For fighters followed him. Jason quickly filled the gaps with YouTube fighters and crossover athletes. The gym's front desk became a merchandise table. Sparring sessions were staged for content. Steelheart was no longer a gym. It was a stage. But 3 blocks away, in a warehouse with no heat, no air conditioning, and no Instagram filters, a revolution was being built. One rope, one bag, one lesson at a time. Walt wasn't trying to resurrect the past. He was trying to build a future. And for the first time in 20 years, he wasn't running from anything. He was teaching again. Not just how to fight, but why to fight, and who to fight for. The offer came in the form of a phone call to Damien's corner. It wasn't flashy, no gold-lettered envelope or promoter's limo. Just a simple message left on Coach Brooks' phone. Imani Carter versus Carla Voss. City Arena. 8 rounds. Televised. Main card. Interested? Brooks read the message aloud while Walt King stood near the back wall, adjusting a loose rope on one of the bags. He didn't flinch. Imani, across the room doing jump squats, froze. Carla Voss wasn't just another fighter. She was the undefeated champion of the Crossline promotion circuit, ferocious, fast, dangerous. And she was Lucas Dane's prize asset. For days, the offer simmered in the air like smoke after a match. Jason Ruiz framed it as a peace gesture, an olive branch to prove Steelheart and Damien's corner could coexist. But Walt and Brooks knew better. Carla Voss was a trap, a rigged headline, a slaughter meant for TV. They'd seen this script before. Feed the underdog to the beast and let the ratings climb. But Imani wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She simply walked up to Walt and said, I want this. Walt studied her face, not for bravado, but for readiness. She had it. Training intensified. The old warehouse became a battlefield. There were no cameras, no nutritionists, no entourage, just sweat, repetition, and silence. Walt didn't teach her to fight Carla. He taught her to fight everything Carla represented. She punches fast, but her hips don't lie, he said one afternoon. She loads before she strikes. That's your window. Imani nodded and kept moving. Tyrell Dawson, now fully integrated into the family of fighters, offered his own bruises during sparring. She's strong, but you're smarter, he said between mouthguard mumbles. And Walt drilled her every day on one principle. Don't fight her fight. Make her fight yours. The night before the match, Walt sat alone in the ring at Damien's corner, the room lit only by a single hanging bulb. Imani found him there, staring into nothing. She sat beside him. You think they'll rig it? She asked. Walt didn't answer immediately. Then he said, they already have. That's what corruption does. It rigs more than the scorecards. It rigs minds. She breathed out slowly. Then what do I do? He looked at her, his eyes weathered but sharp. Make it impossible for them to lie. Fight night came like thunder. The city arena was packed, mostly for Carla. Banners with her face lined the walls. Commentators hyped her record. Steelheart's logo lit up the big screens. In the corner, Jason Ruiz posed for photos. Lucas Dane sat in a VIP suite above the ring, his face like a statue carved from arrogance. But in the far left corner, under dim lights, Imani stood still while Walt tightened her gloves, his voice calm and steady. You don't need to destroy her, he said. You need to reveal her. The first round was brutal. Carla came out like a freight train, fast, loud, explosive. The crowd roared every time she swung, but most of her punches hit air. Imani's footwork was ghostly. She absorbed nothing. She offered nothing back. Walt had told her not to show her hand too early. Let her build her own storm, he'd said. Then walk her through it. By round 3, the boos started. The crowd wanted blood. Carla grew frustrated. Her swings got wider. Sloppy. She was punching shadows, and Imani was walking through a rhythm like she already knew the song. Round 4 changed everything. Imani landed a clean liver shot that folded Carla mid-step. The crowd gasped. Carla dropped to one knee, red-faced and wheezing. The ref hesitated. Too long. He gave Carla more than 10 seconds. She rose, barely, and the bell saved her. In the Steelheart corner, Jason stood yelling at the ref, as if panicked. Walt didn't look at him. He simply said to Imani, they know now. You're not here to survive. Rounds 5 and 6 were dominance by intelligence. Carla, now chasing points, lunged too often. Imani made her miss and made her pay. Body jabs, pivots, perfectly placed counters that whispered instead of screamed. She didn't fight angry. She fought exact. And somewhere between rounds, even the audience began to shift. Cheers started to break through for the quiet girl from the broken gym. Commentators began using words like surgical and masterclass. And Lucas Dane? He stopped smiling. Round 7 brought trouble. Carla landed a hook after the bell. Deliberate. Malicious. The crowd saw it. So did the ref. But no warning was given. Walt stepped up to the apron, his face calm but firm. You see it now, he whispered to Imani as she winced in the corner. They'll let her cheat. Because they can't afford for you to win. She nodded through clenched teeth. Then I'll make sure they can't fake it either. In round 8, Imani dropped Carla, clean. A counter cross that came out of nowhere. Carla hit the mat like a sack of bricks, stunned, glassy-eyed. The crowd exploded. Even the ref couldn't fake that one. He started the count, slow, methodical. Carla rose at 9, swaying. The final seconds ticked down. Imani didn't rush. She danced around her, jabbing, controlling, forcing Carla to survive instead of attack. The bell rang. Everyone waited. And waited. The scorecards were late. Too late. Jason Ruiz looked pale. Lucas Dane was whispering to a suited man behind the scenes. Then the announcement came over the speaker, by split decision. Carla Voss. Silence. Then confusion. Then outrage. Boos echoed. People stood. One commentator even removed his headset in disbelief. Tyrell screamed from the crowd. Coach Brooks swore. Walt said nothing. Imani stood frozen, hands still gloved, as Carla weakly raised her arm, eyes wide with guilt, not pride. The cameras panned to Lucas Dane. He was already gone. Then it happened. A clip uploaded to social media from a ringside viewer showed one of the judges being handed an envelope before the fight. A second clip showed Jason Ruiz talking to a man in the officials' hallway before the decision. Within 30 minutes, hashtag Imani was robbed was trending. Within an hour, ESPN pulled the broadcast replay. And by midnight, Talia Jensen had published an expose titled The Score They Couldn't Hide. The city erupted. Protests outside Steelheart. Articles exposing Dane's finances. Fighters speaking out. Even Carla Voss posted a message on her private account. I didn't win that fight. Imani Carter did. Walt King said nothing to the press. He simply returned to Damien's corner, turned off the lights, and sat in the silence. That's when Imani entered. She was still in her hoodie, hair damp, bruised. "I lost on paper," she said. Walt didn't move. "They wrote their ending. You changed the story. Then what happens now?" He looked up, eyes tired, but proud. "Now, they'll try to erase you." She sat beside him. "Then we'll just make them remember." By sunrise the next morning, the world had changed. Not because the wrong had been corrected, but because everyone had seen it. Overnight, clips of Amani's final round against Carla racked up over 10 million views across platforms. People weren't just sharing a highlight. They were sharing a truth that could no longer be contained. "This is why boxing is dying," one user posted. "They're not afraid of the next champ. They're afraid of the truth with gloves on." The comments were brutal, the reactions global. And in the eye of that storm stood Walt King, silent but steady, like he had seen this storm before and knew it by name. At Damien's corner, the energy was electric. Fighters arrived early, gloves in hand, hearts lit up with something more than anger. It was purpose. They weren't just training anymore. They were part of a movement. Tyrell Dawson started a new live stream, not to brag, but to document the truth. He uploaded raw footage from the warehouse. Sparring, training drills, Walt's coaching moments. No music, no edits, no filters. Just reality. And the internet? It couldn't get enough. "This is what boxing should be," read one viral comment. "Not stage lights and champagne sponsors. Sweat, blood, knowledge. This." Meanwhile, at Steel Art, things were unraveling. Sponsors began pulling out. The press stopped showing up. Jason Ruiz tried to spin the story, releasing a PR statement about judging discretion and respecting official outcomes, but no one was buying it. Especially not when screenshots emerged of his private messages, ones where he laughed at Imani's performance and called the backlash a temporary Twitter tantrum. That leak broke everything open. By that evening, protesters lined up outside Steelheart stores. Not just fans, boxers, coaches, former champions. They weren't holding signs. They were holding up their old gloves, some worn, some bloodstained. A silent statement. "We fight for the soul of the sport." And still, Walt King didn't go on camera. He didn't make statements. Instead, he walked Imani through new drills, fine-tuned her footwork, reinforced her blocks. "You're not training for revenge," he told her. "You're training for the next fight." Because when truth is on your side, it doesn't stop with one opponent. It fights systems. But not everyone was quiet. Talia Jensen published a second expose. This time, not just focused on the fight, but the entire web surrounding Lucas Dane. Shell companies, bribes, hidden payouts, fight rigging going back over a decade. Names surfaced. Judges, promoters, even trainers. And Jason Ruiz? He was listed as a strategic partner in one of Dane's laundering operations disguised as a fitness brand. That article exploded like a bomb. Congressional whispers turned into public calls for an investigation. ESPN suspended their broadcast contracts with Crossline Promotions. Lucas Dane went dark, deleted accounts, pulled funding, vanished from public sight. But the damage had already spread like wildfire. In a twist no one saw coming, Carla Voss requested a rematch publicly. She posted a handwritten note to her social media with no PR gloss, no manager's watermark. Just her words. "I didn't earn that win. I want to face her again. This time on neutral ground. No judges. No tricks. Just truth." It caught fire. Even those who had once booed Imani now demanded justice. #rematch for truth started trending. Then came the real breakthrough. A community boxing league, independent, grassroots, and crowd-funded, offered to host the fight. No sponsors. No corporate interference. Just a rented warehouse, verified judges from abroad, and a live stream team vetted by independent watchdogs. Imani didn't hesitate. Neither did Walt. They accepted. But this rematch wasn't just about Carla anymore. This was about redemption. For a sport, a teacher, a fighter, a son's name, and all the others who had been silenced by the machine. Walt stood before the Damien's Corner team one night, looking at the young fighters, the old gym walls now covered in messages of support from around the world. He wasn't the same man who walked in 3 months ago with a mop in hand and a silent past. His voice was stronger now, not loud, but clear. They thought they'd bury the truth in paperwork and lights. But you can't bury purpose. It rises. Imani stood beside him, her knuckles wrapped, her eyes calm, her body ready. "They took my win," she said. "But they gave me a voice." That line would be quoted everywhere the next day. Back at Steel Art, Jason Ruiz faced collapse. Internal staff resigned. Former fighters came forward with stories of manipulation and mistreatment. One even alleged that Jason altered training footage to make certain fighters look worse. Lawsuits followed. Investigators opened a probe into the gym's finances. His empire was crumbling, one ego brick at a time. And still, Walt didn't watch it happen with glee. He didn't gloat. Instead, he took the phone call from Carla Voss's coach himself. Calm, straightforward. "We're in," he said. "Just one condition, no favors. No favors for us, and no favors for you. This fight belongs to the truth." The date was set. For weeks. 2 fighters. 1 fight. Broadcast not on national TV, but on an open public stream that had already garnered over 40,000 pre-subscribers. Donations flowed in to cover the cost. Volunteers showed up at the new gym site to help build a ring, by hand. Old pros, retired trainers, kids who wanted to box. It wasn't just a rematch. It was a resurrection. And in the center of it all, Imani Carter trained in silence, her movements sharper than ever. Walt's instructions became fewer, quieter, because she didn't need coaching now. She needed trust. She had become what every real fighter aspires to be, not just skilled, but aware. One night, days before the rematch, Tyrell sat outside the gym with Imani. "You nervous?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "I'm not fighting for me anymore." Then who? For every kid who was told to sit down. Every fighter who never got their hand raised because they didn't have the right agent. For Ray. For Damien. For Coach. Tyrell looked at her, nodded, and said what Walt had once said to him. "Then you've already won." As the rematch drew near, Walt finally gave one interview. Not to a sports network, not to a podcast, but to a high school media class from South LA who showed up with cheap microphones and wide eyes. They asked him, "What's this fight really about?" Walt smiled faintly. "It's not about revenge. It's about reminding people that truth hits harder when it's patient." The day of the rematch arrived like a storm held back by prayer. The venue was an old converted freight depot. No stadium seats, no glitzy marquees. Just raw concrete, folding chairs, and a hand-built ring surrounded by real fighters, real fans, and the hungry hum of truth about to step into the spotlight. There were no celebrities on the front row, just veterans with bruised knuckles, single mothers in hoodies, and wide-eyed kids gripping paper signs with Carter written in black marker. Inside a makeshift locker room, Imani Carter wrapped her own hands. No entourage, no music, no speeches, just her breath, steady, even, and focused. She wore a simple black robe. On the back, stitched by her own hands, were 2 names, Ray Barnes and Damian King. She wasn't walking into the ring as the underdog. She was walking in as a vessel for 2 legacies the world had buried, and one she was now building in her own name. Across the ring, Carla Voss stretched in silence. Her usual bravado was gone. No smirks, no taunts, just respect. The fight was no longer about clout. It was about consequences. Her trainer didn't yell instructions. He simply touched her shoulder and said, "No tricks, no fear." And for the first time, both corners were equal. Walt King didn't pace. He stood just outside the ring, his face stone still, hands behind his back, watching like a father sending his child into battle, not to fight for survival, but for something higher. For remembrance. For the redemption of the family name, King. The bell rang. Round 1 began not with fury, but with rhythm. Imani didn't rush. She studied. She moved like water around Carla's power, reading, absorbing, responding. Carla, to her credit, had refined her control. She wasn't swinging wild. She was calculating too. The first round ended like a chess match. No clear winner, just tension growing. By round 3, Imani started to pull ahead. Her jab was precise. Her pivots sharp. She didn't try to dominate. She disassembled, one angle at a time. Carla tried to press forward, but found herself caught in traps. Feints that became body shots, slips that became uppercuts. The crowd, though quiet at first, began rising. Not cheering like fans, but leaning forward like witnesses. Midway through round 5, Carla clipped Imani with a hook, hard. The kind that sends most fighters down or rattled. Imani stumbled, caught herself on the ropes, but didn't fall. She reset her stance, looked at Carla, and nodded, not in challenge, but in understanding. She had eaten the punch, tasted the storm, and decided to stand anyway. Walt's eyes didn't blink. By round 7, both fighters were marked. Carla's nose was bloodied, Imani's right eye swelling, but they kept going. Each exchange was cleaner than the last. The match had become a clinic, a duel of soul and discipline. Carla landed a 3-punch combo that rocked the crowd. Imani answered with a counter that dropped Carla to one knee. She rose again, not out of pride, but because she had to know. And then, round 8. The final round. No knockouts, no trash talk. Just two warriors circling, battered and unbroken, giving everything not to win, but to finish. With seconds left, they locked eyes mid-ring. Carla's breathing ragged, Imani's lips bloodied, and both nodded. Not to signal an attack, but to acknowledge the shared burden they carried, and the moment they'd carved into history. The final bell rang. Silence. Then, cheering like thunder. Not for who won, but for what was proven. The judges stepped forward. This time, 3 vetted officials from separate states, confirmed by an independent ethics committee. Their cards were clear. Winner by unanimous decision, Imani Carter. The building didn't erupt in the way a crowd usually does. It exhaled, deeply, like a community that had waited for justice to land, and finally heard the thud of its arrival. Walt didn't raise his arms. He simply stepped into the ring, wrapped Imani in a hug, and whispered, "You did it. For them. For you." Carla stayed in the ring. She walked over, removed her gloves, and raised Imani's hand herself. Cameras flashed, not the kind of lights built for magazines, but the kind that would live on in every fighter's memory. The next day, news spread fast. ESPN ran the headline. The fight that fixed nothing, but revealed everything. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about resurrection. Steelheart Gym officially shut its doors within weeks. Jason Ruiz was indicted on charges of fraud and fight tampering. Lucas Dane fled the country. But none of that mattered more than what had been built in the shadows. Damien's Corner became the heart of the new league. Fighters from across the country wrote letters, sent tapes, showed up in buses and beat-up cars, asking to train there, not because it was famous, but because it was real. 1 month later, a small memorial plaque was installed above the entrance. It read, "This place was built on names they tried to erase. Ray, Damien, and every fighter they silenced. Walt King." Imani became the face of a new generation, not just as a champion, but as a symbol of earned respect. She refused brand deals that tried to rewrite her image. She gave her first major paycheck to fund youth programs across LA. Her first guest speech wasn't at a banquet. It was at the school where her mother used to mop floors at night. Walt King never gave another public interview. He didn't need to, because his legacy was already echoing through every punch thrown inside the walls of Damien's Corner, by kids who now believe that the ring wasn't where legends died. It was where they were born. This story isn't just about boxing. It's about the fight outside the ring, the battle against silence, systems rigged in shadows, and legacies written off because they came from the wrong neighborhood, the wrong past, or the wrong skin. Walt King was discarded, buried beneath decades of injustice, but he didn't return for fame. He returned to lift others, to prove that truth doesn't retire. It rises. Imani Carter stood for every young soul told they weren't enough, until she made the world see her for who she really was. So what's the lesson? You don't have to wait for permission to be powerful. You don't need a spotlight to matter. What you need is conviction, and the courage to stand up even when the crowd's against you. Because one voice, grounded in truth, is enough to collapse a lie built by empires. Now we turn it to you. If this story moved you, if it stirred something you've buried too long, then don't just scroll past. Leave a comment. Share it. Tag someone who needs to hear it. And most of all, subscribe, because this isn't just a channel. It's a platform for every voice they tried to silence. Every fight they thought no one would watch. The bell has rung. The story is told. Now it's your turn to echo it.